Welcome. I'm Steph, an intuitive hypnotist from Quebec, Canada.
I'm Julie, a past life regression hypnotist and Reiki healer from Wisconsin.
And together, we are the Soulful Mystics. Let's dive right into today's conversation about past lives and reincarnation. What began your curiosity into this topic?
Well, what started my curiosity would definitely be when I started listening to the Past Lives and the Divine podcast. But I think that's probably when I really got deep into it. But before that, I would say when people around me would talk about death and dying and say, oh, when you die, it's just black, there's nothing. And I don't believe that. I don't think that ever sat right with me.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely have to say, I think my whole life I knew there was more to death and dying than just blackness.
Yeah.
What about you?
I had a reading by a girl named Amber, and she brought up the Akashic Records. And so she went into the Akashic Records for me and saw a life that I lived with Max, my partner. And the way that she described it to me, it felt like I've been there before. It felt really familiar to me. And she said that in that life, we were working towards changing the way that animals were taken care of and treated, and that we decided to come back in this life to continue that work and rescue animals. And that's exactly what we want to do.
I love that.
Yeah, and then I was like, okay, Akashic Records, what is this? I need to know everything about it in a deep dive. And then found Gina's podcast, Past Lives and the Divine. And yeah, it was all very interesting. But I also agree with you. I never really felt death was the end ever.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a really scary thought.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and to think about the world and how everything is and how there's people who are rich and people who are suffering, people who are poor, it's like, okay, there has to be more than
Mm.
this. There has to be.
What is your thoughts on that when it comes to having different struggles throughout our lives? I think we have similar beliefs in that we choose our life path in the life between lives before we incarnate.
Yes, I would agree with that. However, I didn't always see it like that.
Yeah.
I think my understanding has obviously evolved over the years and going through everything that I have gone through recently. But I would say in my younger years, when I would think about reincarnation and karma and life lessons and all of that stuff, I had the understanding, which I know now it's more complex than that, but I would have the understanding that you're poor in this life, so maybe in the next life you get to be rich. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you did something bad to someone in this life, so it's going to happen to you in the next life. Now I don't think that's quite how it goes, but for the longest time, that is what I believed.
I feel now thinking about that stuff. If I think about my own personal struggle, dealing with issues in relationships when I was younger, I do feel that the people that I struggled with, we had past life karma that we decided to come back in this life to either resolve, learn something, grow from it. We each have free will. So maybe one of us in that relationship karma decided to go one way and the other one didn't. So we would have to repeat those lessons if we didn't fully understand it or learn from it in your current incarnation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And what about near death experiences? I don't know that we ever talked about that.
I don't think we have.
I watched a show, I Shouldn't Be Alive, I think it's called. You watch that?
I don't think so, but I'm going to look it up because I love hearing stories of near death experiences as well. When I got into listening to Gina's podcast and past lives and reincarnation and all of that stuff, that led me to near death experiences as well. And it's so fascinating to me, the things that people see that they can't even describe and what they feel and how they're so changed when they
Yeah.
come out of it and heal. That is just amazing to me.
It truly is. And in this show, they had a few doctors on there who completely changed their way of thinking and the way that they practice medicine. Because if you work in a hospital, like a surgery room, and the person who is not conscious, when they come back into their body, they can tell you all these details that they shouldn't know. I feel like surgeons, especially, and nurses must believe, their soul is floating around there.
Yes. And the same thing with hospice workers.
Yeah, my
You
cousin
know,
is a
they,
hospice worker.
yes, there is a TikToker. I believe her name is Hospice Nurse Julie. She is just spreading such beautiful messages about death and dying. And she talks about how people in hospice who are near the end will start to see their loved ones or angels and guides, and it kind of helps them get ready for that transition. And those stories too, they are just so beautiful, so fascinating. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, me too. My cousin Mindy, she's a palliative care nurse, and she says when she's at home, sometimes she wakes up to the image of one of her patients, and she just knows that when she goes in, she's going to find out that they passed away. And I find that so interesting because I had a reading from Mark Jade. I don't know if you heard of him. I think he's Canadian because I know he's French as well. He's a really amazing medium, and usually I prefer to stick with psychics because mediumship doesn't really appeal too much to me. I didn't think that I had too many people on the other side that would want to come through besides grandparents. And I was shocked to find out that when I was an addictions counselor, we had the opiate crisis, and in 1 year, I think we lost 9 of our clients that I got to know really well through my years there. And some of them, their drug of choice was not even opiates, it was alcohol. So we were shocked to find out that they were dying of opiates when that's not even something that they would generally use. And 4 of those clients showed up in that reading for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely believe that they don't have to be family or super connected
Hmm.
to show up for sure.
Yeah, and that brings me to the next topic that has been on my mind since our soul synastry reading is soul
Mm.
families and soul tribe, also choosing the family that you have in your life. Do you feel like we stick with the same bubble of people and we just show up for each other in different relationships and different experiences?
Man, I would say yes and no on that. And here's my personal experience with that, or my personal take on it, is I grew up with an adoptive father who he's my dad. He's been my dad my whole entire life. I don't know my biological father, but it's something I've always wondered about, you know, trying to find myself and find who I am. When you grow up as knowing that you have an adoptive parent and you don't know a biological parent, you have this feeling like there's something missing, like a piece of you that you don't know. And growing up knowing that, I think it's just, I don't know how to put it into words. I think it's just the knowing that there's a piece of you missing and not knowing if you're ever going to find that, which I did go down that road. I did meet some of the family members, but my biological sperm donor, I guess, would he didn't want to get to know me, or he just wasn't interested, and that was perfectly okay.
Yeah, his
And
loss.
exactly. But I often think about my life and how it unraveled. Just, it's like obviously I was meant to be with the family that raised me, and they never treated me like I was adopted. They always treated me with such love and like I was always a part of their family. And that is my family.
Yeah.
100%. That is my family. But thinking about this from like a soul level, I mean, I feel so connected to my 2 grandmothers that have passed on, and I have seen them since. But I don't know, there's a curiosity there that it's like, well, how do these other people fit in this puzzle?
Yeah, I find adoption interesting because there's lessons to be learned by the adoptive parent, biological parent, and the child, one way or another. And it might be interesting to take a dive into the life between lives to see if we can gain a bit more clarity there for you.
Yeah, it's just interesting. And I think you might be right. Maybe we are connected on a soul level, but my role in his incarnation this time was that lesson or one of his lessons or something like that. I don't know. Maybe it's even my lesson
Yeah.
to learn about accepting or to learn that family doesn't need to be blood. And that is proven. Like, I have the best dad in the world,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Exactly. Do you feel like our soul is in a spiritual realm? I guess what we call home when we're not in our physical body? And do we go back there when we're dreaming?
I absolutely do believe that. I think our soul goes somewhere. I think our soul even does a work while we're asleep.
I agree.
Do you ever listen to Psychic Teachers, that podcast?
I don't think so.
Well, Samantha talks about this a lot, and I think she refers to it as being a night worker,
Okay.
which, I mean, take that as you will.
Yeah.
That can also mean something else, but I'm talking from a soul level here. Where your soul goes to help other souls. She talks about going to like a night school, but it's her soul, and she meets other people there. Or a lot of her listeners had written in and said, "Oh yeah, I've met you at this oceanside cafe, in my dreams."
Hmm.
And like she's helping these people evolve, helping them in
Yeah.
whatever way they need. And so that's the kind of night work that I'm referring to. It
Interesting.
all yeah, it's so like your soul is leaving, whether it's helping people cross over. And that was another thing. She talks about this story where I don't know if this was a guide of hers. I might be getting it a little bit mixed up, but in her dreams, but it was obviously her soul is leaving to do this work, but this man comes to greet her and takes her into her kitchen and sits her down in the dining room, and there's different spirits around the table, and they say to her, "We've been trying to reach you. However, we learned that to do it at night in your dreams is the easiest way to approach you because you've been so afraid." And so she's able to help these souls cross over or do what they need to do. It's such a beautiful thing. So I absolutely believe our souls leave our body while we sleep. I think some people are aware of it and some people aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I 100% believe that. I had an experience about my grandfather, and he and I are very connected. He's an amazing grandfather and father, so I think everyone in the family feels very connected to him. But he got sick and was in the hospital during COVID, and during that time, we weren't allowed to be with him, and he was experiencing some confusion and what they call hallucinations. But because he was giving the nurses such a hard time, they asked the family to take turns. One person had to be with him 24/7. And so one day he woke up asking my cousin when the helicopter was coming back. And she just kind of went with it to see where it was going. And he said that he was in a helicopter. There was another man driving the helicopter, and we were going for a ride. That's just the short version of it. I had a dream that night that I was in a helicopter ride with my grandfather and my sister in law's father, who is one of my guides on the other side now, who was driving the helicopter. My grandpa was in the passenger seat and I was in the back, and I had Megan with me, my sister in law. So that to me is, look, we took a ride in a helicopter together. Our souls decided to go fly around the world or do whatever we were doing. But then what made it even more interesting was my mom was there one day, and my grandfather asked her to pick up the quarter, but there was no quarter, like a coin. You guys have quarters, is that right? I'm gonna kick myself
Yes.
for asking.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So there was a quarter, and I never have cash on me. So I went outside that same day and found a quarter on my back porch. So I picked it up and I was like, where did this come from? And then my mom told me that story afterwards, and she pretended to pick up the quarter just to make him feel comfortable, not to make him feel like something is weird, telling him there's no quarter there when he can actually see it. And he told her to keep the quarter, put it in your pocket, and it's for good luck.
Aw.
I still have that quarter today.
Aw.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
and he's still with us, right? So I feel like when we get older, it's a lot easier for us to leave our body, especially when our mind starts to go a little bit. I think that it becomes a lot easier for us because our ego is being, or our human part of us is being shut down a little bit more. So it allows our higher self to come through.
Yes. And the same thing with like people who have been in a coma.
Yes.
I think the same thing happens with them too.
Yeah.
I've heard stories of that, and also too about how they're very much aware of everything that is going on.
Hmm.
And that is fascinating in itself too.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that I like to read up on and to listen to because, that's another thing that's very scary for people is not being conscious or starting to have dementia or losing a bit or pieces of yourself. Just to have that reassurance that, we're not just our physical body. We're so much more than that. And we live on, our soul lives on. So even if it just gives somebody a little peace of mind that, it's not just all nothing when we die. We go back to our home and we evaluate our life with our spirit team and we decide what lessons that we actually learned in that life and what we still need to work on. And so it's really just Earth as a school.
Yes, I absolutely believe that too. And I've heard people, describe death as being like someone getting out of the car. It's that easy of a transition.
Yeah.
Like when the soul leaves the body. Obviously, not all death is that easy, but I think our soul leaves
Before
before.
I agree. And then there was something else I wanted to talk about because we've spoken about this quite a bit, our fears and phobias.
Oh dear, yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear people talk about weird fears and phobias because for me, an example is medical equipment. Terrified of it. I will pass out even if it's not being used on me. If I go to a hospital and I see somebody else in a hospital bed with an IV attached to them, I will pass out immediately. My body shuts down. And people have asked me, especially my doctor, because try to get me to get a blood test is just the end of the world. So she really wanted to find out if something happened to me when I was younger. Was I sick and I was in the hospital for a while and being poked and prodded with medical equipment? And no, that is not the case. And for me, the only logical explanation is that something happened in a past life for me to have such a strong phobia. It's not just a fear of the dark or a fear of, well, another fear of mine is frogs. So it's a weird fear, but it's not as intense as this medical equipment fear. So I really believe that that comes from one or many past lives.
Absolutely. I mean, I think my imagination can think of different things that could contribute to the medical fear, but I'm very curious about the frog fear.
Yeah, me too. It's a tricky one.
I wonder if it was like a poison dart. You know how
Oh,
like
maybe.
from the Amazon or something, like
Yeah.
those poisonous frogs and they make, weapons with their poison like the darts, something like that. That might be interesting to
Okay, wait.
explore.
What do you mean darts? They shoot stuff at you?
Yeah, you've never seen like in a movie or something where they make little darts out of the frog's poison, like they dip
Oh,
the.
I thought you meant the frogs would shoot somehow darts at you. Like they would make
No,
some kind of some
I'm
kind
talking
of
about like these tribes in the
Oh,
Amazon.
yes, okay. You just really heightened my fear of frogs for a moment there.
I'm sorry, that was not the intention at all.
Yeah, so like I just pictured a frog being able to turn their saliva into some like anyway, or their tongue becoming a dart or something. Cool.
No, 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 no.
Yeah, that could be dying of a poison that comes from a frog. I don't
Yeah,
know. That would be something that would be more fun to explore rather than my medical equipment
yeah,
phobia.
right.
My mom was afraid of driving over bridges, terrified of it. And then she got a past life regression. It was her only one that she ever got, but she wanted to explore that fear. And she was in a buggy that was pulled by a horse. And she was there with her family, and they had taken a curve too quickly. And she flew out of the carriage over a bridge and drowned.
Jeez.
Yeah, so that was something that I forget how old she was in that life, but once she experienced that and learned that that's where that fear came from, she never had that fear again and she doesn't even remember having that fear in this life. So the past life regression can really help alleviate a lot of these fears, although some of them are a
Yeah.
little bit more deeply ingrained and it might take a couple sessions. So I had one session about the medical equipment, but I think you have to dive in a couple more times because there might be multiple lives that you experience some trauma.
Oh, yeah, for sure. My biggest fear is snakes, and I'm working up the courage to dive into that one. I remember being, gosh, so young. I don't know, maybe 7 or 8. And I would have nightmares about snakes, and those nightmares have evolved. Have you ever watched Indiana Jones?
It's probably been a while if I did.
Yeah, same here. I don't remember which Indiana Jones movie this was, but there is a scene where he has fallen into a pit of thousands and thousands of snakes. And that is kind of similar to my nightmare. And I don't know if seeing that as a kid is what sparked the nightmares, or maybe it sparked some kind of memory in me.
Hmm.
But I've always been afraid of snakes, and my husband jokes. He's like, "Do you know how, like, cartoons run? Like, Looney Tunes or something when they jump up in the air and their feet are moving before they're
Yeah.
actually going?" He says, "That is what I do when I see a snake."
Uh,
And, yeah, it'd be interesting to dive into, but I'm really afraid to.
yeah.
Also, the thing with snakes, I've done a little bit of research over this here and there. Some of the things I found is it could have something to do with a toxic person in your life. And that rings true on certain levels. And the most recent nightmare that I had was over the summer. Gosh, I don't remember every detail of the dream, but it was like I had walked into my room and I knew that there was a snake under my bed. And I felt the terror.
Yeah.
Like I could just feel the terror go through my body. And I woke up and I was sweating and I was shaking and I was terrified. I think there is some significance to that more than just watching a movie. I think maybe the movie sparked this
Yeah.
memory, this past memory in me. I don't know.
Yeah, I
So it
would
would be
agree.
interesting, but I just really don't want to see a pit of snakes.
Yeah. Yeah, that I
But
mean, that would be terrifying.
yes, and I do know that our guides aren't going to give us more than what we can handle. So I think I will explore it. It's just, man, it gives me the heebie jeebies right now. Just thinking about it, I've got chills all over, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Nope, I
But I
get
will
that.
do it.
Yeah, when you're ready. And that's the thing with past life regression is we could take breaks from the harder lessons and go in and experience something just out of curiosity, like a time we lived in our power or a time that we were strong and independent. And there's so much that you can explore in past life regression that we can take turns with the harder lessons and the amazing lessons that we've learned along the way.
Absolutely. And one of the things I'm kind of curious about, but also cautious with, is maybe exploring a life that was not so good, meaning my role in it was not so good.
Oh, yeah, like seeing yourself as the villain.
Yeah, just to learn from it and out of curiosity.
Yeah, maybe like one of those lives Meredith was just talking about that we were
Exactly.
kind of culty.
Yeah. When I had my reading with her back in November, she did talk about some money karma with me where I've not only was I killed for money, but I have also killed for money.
Oh.
And she said maybe even some mob vibes or something
Oh.
like that, which is absolutely not my personality now. But I just think it would be fascinating to explore something like that to see why it happened and also learn from it. I mean, every past life we see, there's a lesson to be learned, there's something to be taken from it.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, just to like feed into the fascination that I have and explore. When we go into these, we are protected.
Hmm.
Our guides are taking us on this journey, and so it is perfectly safe.
Yeah.
I think just going into this with the intention that I just want to learn from it, I think that would be pretty neat to do.
Yeah. Not only lives where we lived differently from we do today, but maybe a life on a different planet or as a different being. I
Yes.
That was something that I had a hard time wrapping my head around. It was very foreign to me and I didn't know if I believed it yet. But after doing all this work, I 100% do. And
Yeah.
when I first read this thing, I forget how it came up for me, but it blew my mind. What if imagination didn't exist? So, what if rather than imagining something, it's really just a spontaneous memory of something that you experienced before? So, that would
Or what
mean,
if it's a channel from spirit
yes,
or from your guides?
yeah, like
Or
because it's real, it exists somewhere else, or your guides experienced it. But like that would mean all the movies, books, dreams, thoughts that exist come from something we've experienced before. Like imagine the alien movies that we see. Anytime I watch a movie with aliens in it, I think somebody had lived through something like this similarly, whether it's the creators of the movie or maybe they're channeling through the Akashic records, or maybe their spirit guides are showing them something, right? To kind of prepare the world for what's out there. And so that was
yeah,
something that really boggled my mind quite a bit.
I also have a fascination about aliens.
Yeah, it's hard
I
not to.
definitely yeah, I definitely believe in it. Have you seen the show on Gaia? It's Ruben Langdon. He would go around and interview different people who channel different beings.
Oh, yes.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Fascinating.
It really is. And the way that they channel is all very different.
It's interviews with ED, extra dimensional.
I find them
Oh,
all
yeah.
very fascinating.
It's so fun having an open mind and just wanting to be curious and explore all these things. I don't know, it's fun.
There was one more thing I wanted to ask you about relationships since we just had our soul synastry reading. I do feel now that we are in the age of Aquarius that virtual relationships are more common
Yes.
and we're just as connected. But I wonder why we chose to live so far apart.
I know, isn't that a bummer?
Yeah, I'm pretty upset with our soul selves.
Maybe it's just to spread our light in different regions.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm gonna go with
Yeah,
that.
I'll stick with that as well.
Yeah.
The one story that really stuck out to me, the parents decided to reach out to a child psychologist, and that person happened to be interested in past lives. And so, as he was talking to this kid, who was 3 years old, would ask him all the right questions, open-ended questions, and the child said he was killed by somebody when he was bigger, and he lived in a different town, but he said the name of the town. And I'm sorry, but 3-year-olds don't know geography when the parents had to
No.
even look up that town because they didn't know. And so, long story short, this psychologist went with them to this town to explore this situation. And the kid ended up leading them to his body.
Wow.
And so the police were there and they found this body, and it was apparent that he was hit in the head with a sharp object like an axe. And exactly where this child's birthmark was on his face was where he was hit, and it matched with the skeleton.
That is incredible.
Yeah, and it gets weirder.
Ooh.
He reincarnated fairly quickly, so the person who murdered him was still alive, and he led them to that person's house. And
No way.
yeah, a 3-year-old just leading
Wow.
people around. Um,
That is amazing, and bravo to these adults for listening to this child.
exactly. And that's really important. Max just found the article on it. He also found the murder weapon. This child was just on point.
Oh my gosh.
And interesting. So his full story is in a book. The children who have lived before. One of my nephews, he is 3 years old as well, and he just started asking his mom if he was going to wake up in the morning. And he's really
Oh my
worried to go to
gosh.
bed because he didn't want to not wake up. And that was a fear that he was having. So maybe when he was about that age in a past life, or no, he said he was bigger. So he said he was bigger and went to sleep and never woke up. And I think that we need to ask them about it, just curiously, to see what comes up so that they get bored of the story and then they eventually lose that fear that they're holding on to from the trauma.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I love hearing stuff like that. So freaking cool.
It is, and it's very healing for everybody, but just for parents who have kids that are talking about stuff like that, I think it's really important to have an open dialogue so that they can release it rather than suppress it.
Absolutely.
And is there anything else you want to say about past lives or reincarnation?
I don't think we're ever going to know everything there is to know about it. But I think one of the best things we can do is just remain curious about it. Keep being open minded and keep exploring, I think. I don't know. I feel like that's what we're here to do.
I agree. And we're going to talk a lot more about this topic in future episodes. And that's it for today's episode. Until next time, stay curious.